Thank you everyone for coming to the June 23rd Edmonton Tableau user group meeting. Still virtual for now. My name is Hins, if you don't know, Hins Chan. I work at Onware. Usually I would be leading this user group, but I'm gonna actually pass it over to Melanie Ma here. Melanie Ma is our co-op student from the University of Alberta School of Business. And this is a great opportunity for her to kind of lead and host a session. So I'm going to pass it over to Melanie now.
Thank you so much, Hins, for the introduction. My name is Melanie Ma. I work at Onware as the marketing assistant, and I'm super excited to be taking over as the host for today's Edmonton Tableau user group meeting. But before we dive into the agenda, let's hear from you. So I'm going to be putting up some poll questions. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Does everyone see the questions? Awesome. Yeah, so I'll just give everyone a few seconds to fill them out. Okay, looks like the majority of you have filled it out. I'll share the results. Wow, so we have a lot of Tableau experts in the room. That's really awesome. And now let's move on to the next poll question. Still waiting on a couple more responses. Okay. All right, still a few coming in. Okay, I'll share the results. Wow, that's nice. For some of you, it's your first Tableau user group meeting, and then others have attended virtually and even when the meetings were in person. So we're very happy to have everyone join us today. And then we'll have one more question. Waiting on 4 more people. Okay, awesome. Okay, so it's good to see that the majority of you are already part of the Edmonton Tableau user group forum. But if you haven't already, you can just join the YAGTUG forum by following the steps just up here on the screen, as it's a great way to stay updated on the latest Tableau events in Edmonton like this one, and connect with the data visualization community. This meeting will be recorded, and the recording will be made available on Tableau's YouTube channel, as well as the Edmonton Tableau user group forum. So here's a quick overview of all the topics we'll cover. Our first speaker, Lee Feinberg, president of DecisionViz, will start us off with how you can persuade quietly and create dashboards that motivate action without shouting. We'll have a quick break at 2:50, and then my colleague from Onware, Pasek, will walk us through his dashboard inspired by one of the earliest data visualization pioneers in healthcare, Florence Nightingale. And finally, we'll end off with a fun chance to win prizes, including a Tableau e-learning code for an education course. If you have any questions during the meeting, feel free to type them into the chat box and we'll review them at the end of each speaker's presentation. So introducing our first speaker, Lee Feinberg. Lee founded DecisionViz in 2012 to help clients become leaders in the people, process, and culture around data visualization. With 20 years of experience in analytics, data visualization, and business intelligence, Lee served as a Tableau ambassador from 2016 to 2020 and currently serves on Tableau's customer advocacy board. Not only does Lee speak at TUG meetings, but he also founded and ran the Tableau user groups in New Jersey and New York from 2010 to 2018. So I'll now pass it over to Lee.
And then I'll pop off once I get the presentation up and running. All right, hopefully we're all good.
Yep, I can see it.
Fantastic. Well, thanks to the user group team and Alyssa at Tableau and all of you out there in the audience, wherever you're calling in from. I'm actually in central New Jersey, and we've got a beautiful summer day. I have to get used to saying summer day now. And it'll be heating up out here pretty quickly. And for those of you who've been in this area, you know it'll be a hot, humid summer out here in the east. But thanks so much today for joining this conversation. And I do want it to be a conversation. So please throw your questions out into the Q&A as we go along. And I want to talk about this idea of what I call Persuade Quietly, which is really how do you start to design your visualizations and think about your visualizations in a way that get your ideas across very easily without needing to have fancy charts and lots of colors and all the other kinds of things that you might see out there, but just in a simple way and get your message out there. And I'm going to share a few examples and give you some, hopefully practical tips that you can start to use right away in your work, because that's what's most important here, is that you can take these ideas and start doing something with them to make your work better. So I'd like to lead off with this one idea, which is that your biggest frustrations are not your fault. And I want to show you a way that you can put an end to this. Because if you're like I was, you would put a lot of your personal and mental energy into creating a dashboard. And then at the end of the day, once you published it, it wasn't really getting the kind of engagement that you were hoping for. And of course, that's disappointing because you're thinking that, wow, nobody else sees the same value in it that I do. And I put a lot of work into that. This is how I felt for a long time. And I wanted to advance my skills and find ways to work smarter and achieve better results. And I've been researching for over a decade why this happens and working on practical solutions that I've been sharing worldwide with my peers, colleagues, and clients. So in the next 25 to 30 minutes, I hope that you'll be able to start making a few changes and knock this problem down to size. And I'll give you a few tools, some step-by-step instructions so that you can repeat these things for yourself. And it doesn't matter if you're an advanced dashboard designer, that you're using Excel a lot, or that you're maybe even just starting out with Tableau. This is going to save you a lot of time and have you make sure that your work has more impact. And the main thing here is I'm going to give you 3 ideas that I believe will upend the way that you think about data visualization. And I know that maybe that sounds a little dramatic, but I have seen the change happen over and over with my clients. And so I expect that you'll get some of the same there. And of course, this helps the companies I work with, my clients, but what I found is it also helps their careers too, because they're able to do their work better. That's of course very valuable, because who doesn't want to get better at their job and get promoted? Now, as I mentioned, my name's Lee Feinberg, and I'm the president and founder of DecisionViz. And what we do is help our clients build what we call a trustworthy army of decision makers. And you heard Melanie talk about a few of the things that I've been involved with when it comes to Tableau. And so, of course, I really love Tableau. But the thing that I'm really most proud of, especially most recently, is working with the James Madison University, where my daughter is a student, and help them with their COVID dashboard. And this was an article that was published in their magazine recently. And this was also highlighted on Tableau's COVID page. And it might actually still be up there. I haven't checked recently. So I really love to do all kinds of work when it comes to Tableau. And I've been teaching these ideas that I'm going to expose you to around data literacy and visualization for many, many years, since about 2013. And it's really something that I love and that I think about quite a bit. So the 3 ideas that I'm going to cover today are things that go beyond just building dashboards. So here they are. Number 1, visualization is a language that you learn just like any other language. There are rules, guidelines, and strategies. And with the right amount of practice, like working with other languages, you can get good at this. Number 2, all of our brains have what I like to think of as automatic functions to decode visual data patterns. The problem is the brain gets confused when it doesn't see the patterns that it's looking for. So I'm going to show you what those patterns are so that you can create visualizations that are more impactful. And number 3, there are 5 foundation visual traits that make up most dashboard work that we all do. And so if you can get good at these, your dashboards will be beautiful, but more importantly, persuade people to take action. And as we go through this, one thing I'd like you to keep in mind, even though I told you about my love for Tableau, everything that I'm going to share with you, you can use with any visualization software, because I know that, of course, all of us here are fans of Tableau, but we still find ourselves using things like PowerPoint and Excel and Keynote in some of the work that we do. So these principles will help you in whatever software you're using. Before I jump in, I want to share an analogy about why I say visualization is a language that you have to learn. And it's not just knowing the features and functions of the software like Tableau. So imagine your company wants you to be good at writing. So they train you on every feature and function of Microsoft Word. But here's the thing. They actually didn't teach you anything about the language of your country, how to construct a sentence, or say how to craft a story. Now, with some work, you probably figured out this is the famous phrase, quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. That's much easier to understand. But this is exactly what happens to folks like us who are practitioners of analytics and data visualization. Your company probably invested a lot of time and money to train you on the software. So sure, you know how to use it, but you never really got trained on the language of visualization or data storytelling or data literacy. So because of this, it doesn't really how many options and buttons you click in the software. What happens is your visualizations just really don't hold up when it comes time to the hard work of using them to make decisions and take action. And the thing that's always surprising and to me is management assumes that the visualization software just magically helps you be good at writing visual stories that engage and persuade. And I guess most of us probably know that they're wrong. And because of that, companies are really missing some big opportunities to use their data in a way that really helps them drive the business. So before we dive into a few of those case studies, I want to give you a little understanding of how the brain works with understanding visual language. So as I mentioned, we can recognize very complex what's in literally the blink of an eye. So here's something I think will really blow your mind. Listen to this. So our brains are working on images as soon as we see them. So in a way, we're thinking about what it means before using effort to think about it. So when this happens, when images don't show information in a way that communicates the message, or it's just confusing, it slows us down from understanding. And the longer it takes to decipher that visualization, the more inclined people are to just ignore it and they just move on to the next thing, which of course isn't good for how work gets done. But by harnessing our brain's natural processing power, we can really get through a large amount of information if we do it the right way. That's what I'm going to introduce you to. So what is it exactly that's going on inside our heads? What are these patterns that I'm talking about? Well, there are 5 common patterns in data visualization. These are not all the patterns, but these are the ones that most of us end up working with on a daily basis. And they'll probably look familiar to you. It's possible, though, you never really thought about them as patterns. So one is location. There's size, gradient, which is sometimes called color intensity. There's color, which is different than gradient, sometimes called color hue, and shape. And your brain is not just looking for each of these alone. It also knows how to handle these kinds of patterns when you combine them. So when you understand how the brain interprets each of these traits, you're not just going to be clicking options in the software, because you'll actually understand how to use these traits to your advantage and why you're making specific choices, so you'll better understand how your audience is going to react to your visualizations. Now, while you might find visualization software easy to use, and Tableau is generally pretty easy to use, that's not necessarily a good thing. I know that sounds strange, so let me explain. When you're using visualization software, we tend to treat each of these 5 traits equally, because of course it just takes a click to put them anywhere into a chart, but they're not equal. Some are easier for our brains to process. So the fact that some visuals are easier to process is what I call a hierarchy. It's not the hierarchy like you technically may know about in Tableau itself. So consider this example. depending what you're trying to communicate to somebody, you would potentially use size before gradients, and you would want to use color before using shapes. Because what happens when you create visuals that go against this hierarchy, it causes your audience to work harder to interpret the visual, or they might interpret it incorrectly, which is, the worst case for analysts like us. So I've got 3 examples I'd like to show, and I'm going to really focus on the area of color and gradients, because I think that while they're the most used probably of all the things that we work with, they're also the most abused. And I want to break in and break down these few dashboards and show where they're not following this hierarchy and how you can make them adhere more towards these kind of data literate ideas I'm talking about. So what are some of these abuses that I'm mentioning when it comes to color? One is that we might just use too many gradients or colors, and what happens is nothing then stands out, and it's hard to know what's really important. Another area is that we might use the same gradient or color to represent more than one thing. And that really messes with our brains, because now it's harder for the audience to understand what they're looking at. And the third one is using color when you don't need to. And this confuses your audience because they still try to understand why the color is there, when maybe it really has no purpose at all. Now, I could list probably a dozen other serious violations, but we don't have time to do that. And I want to get to some practical tips. Let's take a look at this dashboard. The author of this dashboard clearly likes to use orange, and in particular, kind of an orange gradient. And one of the problems here is, first of all, is there's no color legends. So hopefully all of you are doing that and in your work. So it's really impossible to know what's going on. And we've got lots of other colors. There are these green headers, we've got a gray background, and then of course we've got this pie chart in the middle, which has even more colors. As I mentioned, the goal of using color or gradients is to make your message stand out, right? So the more colors you use, the brain is having harder and harder time to interpret what that message probably is that you're trying to get across. So for the sake of this discussion, I added the color legends back in, and some problems start to pop out right away, because you can see that the same gradient are used to represent this measure called amount expended on multiple charts. And it's used with different dimensions, and so the ranges end up being different on each chart for the same measure. So that could be very confusing, right? Because you don't really know now what they mean, especially without the legend. And you can also see some of these same orange colors in the pie chart. So you can see a lot of the problems I already mentioned are happening here. So let's take a look at how we can use the hierarchy to transform some of these charts. Now I'm going to start with this pie chart, because I expect a lot of you use pie charts and probably run into this problem I want to point out. So a pie chart, if you break it down into these different traits, it's using size, which is the size of the slices. It uses color, and then it uses labels also to help encode the data. And that's a lot for our brains to process. I know it might not seem like it, but you're adding a lot of information in. And the whole point of using visualization is to get your ideas across quickly. You just want to look at it and have somebody understand what's happening. So what I want to share with you, this next idea, is really important, and it's going to help you gain control over your visuals. So when you use this hierarchy, if you want to simplify a visual, you start by finding a way to remove what's the hardest trait. So for a pie chart, the hardest trait is that we would like to figure out a way to remove color. And let's step through and I'll show you what happens when we do that, because of course there's going to be some implications. So if we remove the color, well, we just get this. And now the pie chart really doesn't work because it's harder to tell the slices apart. They all look the same, except for the fact that we have the labels. Okay, so we probably want to find a different way to use these slices, and maybe it would be better if we do something like this. We turn each slice, instead of using the size there, we use it for the size in the bar chart. And this is a really big improvement. It's very easy now to see what the values are, and they line up. We can sort them high to low, and very rapidly we see exactly what's going on. So this is a big improvement in general to use a bar chart instead of a pie chart. Now, I also want to point out a common problem, which isn't as much about the hierarchy, but it's about showing information, especially when we're talking about numbers. It's probably not important in terms of making decisions that, in this case, properties and the other labels on the pie chart are being shown down to single digits. So it's much better to summarize it in some other format. It could be millions, hundreds of thousands, something that doesn't take up, one, so much space, but also doesn't require so much energy to interpret. Because remember, too much information is also overwhelming in a form like this. So please keep that in mind when you're working with numbers. I know a lot of people that you work with might say, I want to see a number, the whole number, but ask them how it was going to be helping them in terms of making a decision, seeing it down to that level, and maybe you can simplify it. So let's get into this dashboard and seeing some ways to simplify it as a whole. So first thing is, I took this header, which has a logo. It's got this big title, which is kind of generic, and then it's got some information here in terms of total spending and a drop-down filter, and condensed it to this. So now it's pretty simple. It gets the idea across, and it combines a lot of that information into a much simpler header. So it's not really anything to do with the hierarchy. It's just how I started off looking at this, and hopefully that can itself be a good tip for you. Now, people, as you may have heard at other times, people tend to read a dashboard from left to right or top to bottom. So since this is the first chart someone would tend to see, I thought that it would be good to keep the gradient on this one. Now remember, we're going to be looking for ways to get rid of a lot of that color that's on the rest of the chart, but I thought it'd be good to keep it here. And so it'll look like this. You can already see that that first chart you had to scroll because of the way the dashboard was laid out already with that big amount of information that I replaced with this simple header. I'm able to actually fit the whole chart in there without any scrolling. And of course, it's better to not have to scroll because now I can see everything all at once, which is going to help with my decision making. And I sorted this high to low. The other one was sorted alphabetically. So it looked kind of weird because the gradients were all over the place. You tend to want to see gradients go from light to dark or dark to light. So that's another area where it can kind of slow your brain down because it just seems kind of weird. Here's the pie chart that we already took care of. So that one's easy. On this bar chart, because it's got a date range, my assumption is that the author wanted to show it or have us think about it more as a trend. So I turned that into a line chart. And lastly, we've got these two more bar chart kind of number charts with some gradients in there, and they're sorted in different ways. And we're also not able to see all the information, so we have a lot of scrolling going on. So they could be replaced by that. So let's take this in for a second. And here's what we started with. And before I show you one more thing, I want to point out that this one has a gray background, which is also color, of course. I like to use a white background on almost all of my work. It's easier on the eyes, and then you can use that gray as another color in your visuals, right? Because you have to consider all of these elements. So here's the final one. And I think I really love this alternate version. We've got it much clearer. We've reduced the number of colors. We've aligned the visual better to, I think, what their intent was. And it still takes up the same amount of space. So even though we've got a lot more information in here, it's a little bit more open, and we're able to use this a little bit more effectively. So let's jump into another example here. It's another great one. You can see here that the same colors are used to represent 4 completely different sets of information. And again, what happens when your brain sees this, it starts to try to make connections. It says, oh, purples must be related to purples, and blues to blues, and light blues to light blues, and so forth, right? But there are no connections between here. You can see the color legends are completely unrelated to each other. So this is confusing for no reason at all. This is just done by an author who just wasn't thinking about it, and probably was more concerned with, if I had to guess, kind of making it look cool, right? Make it look interesting, because they've got 4 different types of charts in here, and they threw in things that, you know, bubble charts and tree maps, which kind of get your attention, but that's not really how you want to work. Remember, the goal is to communicate clearly and quickly. So let's take a pass at how we can make these be more useful. So this pie chart we've already talked about, and we can do the same thing we did like before and just turn this into a simple bar chart. And you can see I'm still using these neutral grays. I like to use these a lot because they get the point across. You have the bars, which get the information out, of course, in terms of what the values are on these measures. Okay. This next one that has the 2 colors on the bar charts, because it's a dark blue and a light blue, it almost starts to feel like a gradient, even though it's only 2 colors. So I thought it would be better to show upstream and downstream as 2 clearly different, unique colors. Also because you can't use gradients on a dimension, and upstream and downstream are more like a dimension, of course. And then you've got this bubble chart. And a bubble chart is really, in a way, like a pie chart when you think about it. It's using size, shape, shape's the same, and color. And in this case, the size, instead of being on the slices, it's the size of the bubbles. So because they're very similar, I thought in this case, you know what, we probably should just also make that into a bar chart. So you've got 3 bar charts going on here. And I don't want you to think that that is too redundant. I know a lot of people say, I don't want to use too much of one chart. And I agree with you that that's something to be aware of. But because it's only 3, and they're 3 small bar charts, you can get away with it. Plus you've got one in the middle that's breaking it up by using color in an informative way. This last one here is very surprising to me because it's showing geographic information. So instead of a tree map, we should use a geographic map. And instead of using, having those sizes in the tree map, we're just using a gradient to represent that, and then put the exact figures out there by the circles. So this is a lot simpler and a lot more appealing to a user, because it doesn't have all those colors. It doesn't have all these different types of charts going on. So it's going to be a lot easier for someone to work with. And one thing I want to point out here again is that what color is and what gradients are, because a lot of times people say color, but they really mean color as in unique colors, or they might mean color as in gradients, but you have to remember they're really two different things. It's very important. So here, gradients is something that you use with measures, and it's either going to be different shades of one color or shades of, say, multiple colors, which we've got here. And in this case, this is this kind of thermal range is built into Tableau. And color means unique individual colors, not shades of colors. And these are used by dimensions. And the point here is to use color to make something stand out. That's it. When you start to use colors and gradients to make your pages look pretty, that's, I would say, when the trouble begins. So I want to close up with this and then have a few minutes for questions. So in this last example, this author liked blue. There's blue everywhere. It's in the headings, it's on all the visuals. And again, there were no color legends on here, so who knew what was going on? Again, there's lots of different chart types. They've got these chart types that are dual axes, so they're using multiple traits. And those get very difficult for people to interpret in general. I think we can do a lot better here. So I just put the color legends back in, and you can start to see some problems again. In this case, they're using similar colors and gradients to represent information on multiple charts. But again, there's no relationship among the data. So you can't use this for making decisions because you can't have the same gradients mean completely different things, or the same blue colors mean the same things. It just goes against all of what our brains are trying to understand when we look at this. So let's take a few pieces and see what we can do here. So this chart is really combining two traits. It combines the location trait because it's using time on one axis, and it's using the charge values on the other. And it's also using a gradient on here to encode some other information, which is the month over month change. And this gets very difficult to process because you've got these kind of layers of information that are a little bit difficult. So as I mentioned before, when you're trying to simplify a chart, you try to take away the one that's the hardest trait. So in this case, it would be gradient. So when we do that, we would just get left with a chart like this, right? It's a common line chart. So we still need to get that month over month information here. So there's, of course, lots of ways to do that. I just did it this way as a bar chart. And this one emphasizes the positive change with the green. You could, of course, emphasize the negative change if you wanted to by, say, showing the what's here as a gray bar in red and then showing the green bars as the gray. It really just depends what points you want to emphasize. So you don't always have to think about breaking up changing a chart and coming out with one chart in place of it. You can end up with multiple charts to get that information across. Let's take one more example. This chart is trying to show a relationship between values. So the value on the bar and the value of the gradient. Again, this is tough to process because you have these two layers of information that you're trying to interpret. So for me, when it comes to showing relationships, I always think of an XY plot, which is using the location trait, right? X and Y. And that one's the easiest for us to use. So let's see what that could become. So it might look something like this, or you could rotate it depending on where you wanted to place the values. But what's great is now you can start to see a cluster here and a cluster here comes out very simple, in a simple way, very visually. And maybe I want to now figure out which one I want to investigate. It'd really be hard to get this picture in your mind mentally. You just want to show it straight ahead. So here's my before image, and here's the after image. I'm not going to go into all the details here, of course, but I just want to point out a few things, right? You can see the chart that we just rearranged in the upper left and in the lower right. Those are the two we broke apart. But the thing is, think about which one you would rather show your boss, the first one or this one. It's the same information, it's just rearranged in a different way, reduces the color, and emphasizes the message and the key points that we want to get out. So before we get into some Q&A quickly, one more thing that I want to make an offer to you is if you're interested in getting a download of that 5 traits hierarchy, just send me an email to 5@decisionviz.com and put the word yes in the subject line. So thanks so much for listening, and I hope you've been able to learn some ideas that you can put into action right away. There's plenty of ways that you can get a hold of me, and I'll ask the team if they can forward this out to everybody. I've got a YouTube channel where I do interviews with folks in the industry and LinkedIn and every place else. So let's see if we've got anything in the Q&A or if anybody wants to throw out any other questions.
Thank you so much, Lee, for your presentation and sharing your tips on how to transform dashboards so that it's easier to interpret and understand. There is a question in the chat. Someone asks, where does motion fit in with the 5 visual traits?
Great question. So motion is, it's not, I would say, as much obviously it's not one of those 5 core traits that I laid out. And there are many other traits that we work with. And you could think of motion as a trait. But again, that's one that you have to use very carefully because depending on how much information you have on the screen, right, it's not always easy to follow where things are moving to, right? And I know that, especially in Tableau, that's something that was added pretty recently, right, within about the last year. And it's kind of, I would say, one of those sexy things, and it looks pretty cool. But in terms of analytics, you've got to be pretty careful with it. In terms of where it fits with the 5 traits, essentially you can use motion with any of the visual in Tableau, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a bar chart, a line chart, right? Anytime something's moving, Tableau has a mechanism to use the motion capability. Where I think motion is best used, I'm not necessarily saying this with the 5 traits, is when you want to really emphasize and show something strikingly move from one spot to another, if you're kind of going from A to B, or if you're narrating a story. I think there's a famous video you could find from this Hans Rosling, R-O-E-S-L-I-N-G, if you just Google that, over on YouTube. He's got some pretty amazing stuff, and he was kind of the inspiration behind, I think, some of the animation things that people do today. So take a look at that. So, but again, he was narrating a story, and it wasn't just watching things move around on the screen. So his voice adds another layer of information to that presentation. I see another one popped up here. Do you agree that pie charts are more suitable for 2 to 3 categories at most? Yes and no. I still tend to think that even something like a bar chart could be good for just when it's 2 to 3 categories. One reason is that for managing the real estate, pie charts tend to take up a lot of space, and it's hard for you as the author to control how much that is. And so you might have a pie chart and it has to take up 2 or 3 times more space than it needs to if you could just make it as a simple bar chart, or maybe a stacked bar chart, or even you could do it as a gradient if you didn't want to do it as a bar chart. So I always think there's an easier way than pie charts for almost any circumstance. If you have something where you're showing, say, a yes or no type answer, maybe that would work fine with a pie chart from a clarity perspective, if you really wanted to use a pie chart, but I tend to just stay away from pie charts. That's just my preference. But great question. I think that one always comes up.
Awesome.
All
Thank you.
right.
If anyone has any more questions, I'd like to remind you to feel free to type them in the chat box. And I think Hinz also put in the chat the name of the animation person, Hans Rosling. I'll just give a few more seconds.
That is.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think it might be ROES, but if you Google that, it'll find it for sure. Yeah.
So I'll just give a few more seconds to see if anyone else has any more questions for Lee.
Great. And feel free if any other questions come up, you've got all my contact information. I'm happy to have a chat.
Awesome. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, let's see. We will move on to our break. What time is it right now? 2:51. So we'll be back at 3 o'clock. Thank you so much, Lee, again for your presentation. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Just wait maybe a minute or two for everyone to come back from their breaks. Okay, well, let's hop back into our second half of the meeting. We have our next speaker, Sean Pasek. Sean is an associate at Onware Business Solutions. Prior to joining the Onware team, Sean operated his own consulting firm working with small companies on data capture and analysis strategy. Coming from a physics background, he brings an empirical approach to business analysis and constantly strives to separate signal from noise. I'll let Sean take it away.
Hello, hello. You've got my screen over there, hey?
Yep, you can see your screen.
Okay, so thanks everyone for sticking around. Today I'm going to present a little new flavor of dashboard. It's going to be on the collected works of Florence Nightingale. I promise I had no previous knowledge of how many bar charts were going to be featured in the previous talk, but that's no shots at bar charts. As Lee thoroughly explained, they're a very, very good visual, and I agree they should basically be used in place of pie charts whenever possible. But today we're going to be looking at something a little different. Before we do that, I just wanted to give a quick introduction to us at Onware. As Melody mentioned, my name is Sean. I've been an associate at Onware for just under a year now. The company itself, we're a software company local to South Edmonton. You can see on the right here, we have our shiny new sign we're very proud of. If you're driving south 34th and Parsons Road, you should see it on your right-hand side. And we've got three main branches of our business. So we have our contract administration software, which is our custom in-house software product geared more towards construction firms and architects. We also do custom software development on a sort of ad hoc basis. If you got a problem, we'll try to solve it. And third, and what I'm most involved in, is business intelligence and consulting in that area. So we're a Microsoft partner working with Power BI and the Microsoft stack, as well as, and the focus of today, a Tableau partner and reseller. So we're excited to offer both of those. One of the parts that I really love about working at Onware is the diverse array of clients and subjects that I get to work with under the broad umbrella of data analysis and reporting. It can really take you in a lot of different directions. So today I'm going to share with you one of the more unique projects that I've worked on, one with no bar charts, no dollar signs, no trend lines. Instead of these, sort of traditional business visualizations, we're going to be looking to switch gears into the world of academia and talk about text data and the archival collections of one Florence Nightingale. So a little background before we jump into the technical stuff here. I'm far from a Florence Nightingale expert. That would be our client, Dr. Lynn McDonald, but I'll provide the SparkNotes summary here on who Florence Nightingale is and why you should care, both as a data analyst and somebody who might go to the hospital someday. So Florence Nightingale is celebrated in the healthcare community as a pioneer in the field of modern nursing. Anytime we can celebrate nurses these days, it's a great opportunity. So very topical. I was happy to work on this project and learn a little bit more about Florence Nightingale's contributions to that field. Her research and writing really changed the way that we approach hospital hygiene really pioneered the sort of field of nursing and saved countless lives, which were previously lost due to preventable transmission of diseases inside of hospital settings. And in addition, and then sort of special to me, is she made great data visualizations. So there's a data viz angle on this subject as well. Like many people in the audience, I imagine, she realized that her statistics-based research would only be impactful if important stakeholders could easily understand the conclusions of her work. Hopefully that sounds familiar to a few of you. While Nightingale was in charge of a field hospital in the Crimean War, she implemented several changes in the organization of hospital beds and a regular schedule for cleaning beddings, wound dressings, that sort of stuff. Things that we really take for granted as part of the sort of modern hospital experience right now. But as a result, preventable deaths from disease were greatly reduced, and the death rate of soldiers admitted into her hospital was cut from 42% to 2%. The polar area diagram that you see on the right hand of your screen right now is one of her more famous visualizations. This version was shared with Britain's Secretary of State for War, and it clearly conveys a dramatic reduction in fatality rate from April of 1854 to March of 1856. So really some eyebrow raising numbers here. We see that the legends is sort of tough to make out. You know, we don't really use italics in terms of in place of a color legend anymore, but the light blue wedges are sort of fatalities that were a result of these easily transmissible diseases that she identified and that she could prevent, whereas the black is sort of wounds that were actually inflicted in the battlefield. The pink here gets a sort of anonymous label of miscellaneous, but the real focus here is that starting in 1854, going around our rose diagram circle, and then doing it once more from 1855 to 1856, we see that the proportion of total deaths due to the spread of these diseases really falls off. So an effective way of conveying an important finding from her research. And upon seeing this report, Nightingale's design for field hospitals became the British norm and eventually really the norm of medicine all across the world. And thousands of lives were saved as a result. So a big early win for the field of nursing, for the field of data visualization. And because you know, she was doing this work while also running a field hospital without access to a computer, we're going to let her slide for not having the scale bar that tells us how many deaths these are, or for having any data labels on it. So the dashboard that I'm going to show today is going to be concerned with the writings of Florence Nightingale here. It's eventually going to be published up to Tableau Public, where our client, Dr. Lynn McDonald, will be able to share it with all of her peers. To give you some background on the sort of problem and the pain points that we were trying to solve here, I'll take you to the old Florence Nightingale website here. So essentially this website just brings together a bunch of collections of writings. We're mostly concerned with this archival material here. So if I click in here, there's a couple of chronological files. I'll pop one open here just to give you a sense of what we're working with. And they mostly look like this. You've got a date in a certain format, and then a description of a life event, going all the way back to the birth of Florence Nightingale's grandfather in 1752. And if you were to scroll all the way down, you would get to about the 20th century. In addition to that sort of chronology file, we also have the actual sort of primary source documents. I might be butchering the primary source document nomenclature there. This is probably secondary, but what these are is that these are either Dr. Lynn McDonald herself or a grad student has typed up letters which Florence Nightingale herself wrote and which she references in all of her research on this subject. So you can see this isn't really, you know, our traditional SQL database that we're looking at. It's really a completely different sort of style of data analysis. But if we take a preliminary scroll through, we see one, that there's a lot of it. and that it's pretty unstructured. There are some patterns that we can latch onto here. We'll see that this F31 and F31V are both examples of folio numbers. Those are roughly going to correspond to pages. But the main idea here is that we have a lot of text information, and it's not very well organized. And we'd like to get it into an organized format so that it can be better consumed. Just to throw some numbers out there, to this point on this project, we've got 54,000 of these documents. So this would be one document here, one folio number. And they're across 242 different archives. So I'll go back to my PowerPoint. Get this one up here. There we are. So we've got a fun challenge on our hands here. Like I say, our project in this, or our goal in this project was sort of twofold. We've got a data processing step, and as we just saw on the site, our data source was a series of HTML files which contained several typed copies of those letters. So our first challenge really is to consolidate those and organize them into a structured database. So you see we're going from HTML. We're going to use a combination of Python and a library called Beautiful Soup in Python. They're indicated by that weird Victorian era frog drawing. And that's going to get us eventually into SQL. Once we're in SQL, of course, very friendly and easy to use with Tableau. And the goal in that sort of second stretch of this project will be to organize all of those archives in a way that's easily parsable. You can search by subject or date or archival collection and really get to a primary source document like what we saw there pretty quickly. So here's our high-level roadmap. We're going to go HTML into a mysterious Python blender there, into SQL, and then out into Tableau. And I'll just do a bit of background here, and a really important aspect of this sort of process and working with any clients is exploratory data analysis. So very important, just like in business intelligence, part of the early stages of this project was to understand all the weird specific rules which were unique to this domain. As we learned during this project, academia has their own system of organizing information. An archival collection, as you see on the left here at the top of my rough sketch, may have many archives indicated by archive numbers. And you can imagine these archives as sort of thick, dusty old folders inside of a dimly lit room in a British library, because that's basically what they are. And within these archives are many pages. Those are indicated by those folio numbers. You can see them at the bottom of my little pyramid there and highlighted in that sort of extract I took from the HTML. And in addition to the letters, of course, we saw that chronology file. So that chronology file summarizes a whole bunch of events. It itself is very long. And it's going to refer back to combinations of these archive and folio numbers. So as you can see on the right, the formatting can be inconsistent. There's a lot of manual data entry that preceded us getting our hands on this data. Remember, these are sort of typed up, and there's a human aspect there, which can be full of human error. And as an example, this V that you see would in reality be the verso or reverse side of folio number 3. So a lot of inconsistency there. This is really not a system that was designed by database administrators. It makes sense in the world of academic research and people that flip through these archives and these folios themselves. But we really had to get up to speed on that logic, sort of understand what it was in theory, understand what it was in practice. And yeah, real world data is messy and it's hard. But that being said, once we have that fundamental understanding of the data structure, including all of its shortcomings, we can write some magical Python code. I won't go too deep into the details of the Python code, as this is a Tableau user group and not a Python user group. But I will take this time to point out that Onware has a great team of coders and problem solvers, not just Tableau or any sort of BI product experts. We're capable of handling all sorts of unique data sources, data connectors, and unstructured data, such as we did here. not all data has to originate from a SQL database for it to be useful to your organization. As you can see here with a little elbow grease and domain understanding, we've moved a bunch of disparate HTML files into a structured table format, which is going to play nicer with Tableau. If anybody out there is curious about my sort of mysterious Python pixie dust machine here, the one sentence or run-on sentence explanation is this. So my source files go through a text parsing library called Beautiful Soup. They get discretized based on those folio numbers. They get a nice index, which will end up being useful later at our reporting step. And those results are written into a big pandas data frame, which you can see in that bottom right. That pandas data frame can then be written out to a SQL database using a library called SQL Alchemy. And if none of that last sentence made any sense to you, that's okay, because we are now ready to go into Tableau. So I'll shift gears once more here. I'll take us right into Tableau Desktop. So here we are. This is the Nightingale archives. Again, our goal in this step was to create a more effective search tool with a visual layer that would let us approach this data from a new perspective, not so much sifting through those HTML files in the old website, but being able to get everything and get to it quite quickly. There's a lot of subtle UX tricks that are happening here. So if you have any questions about what's happening in the background, now we're sort of in the Tableau part of the talk, please feel free to drop a question in the chat and I will get to it at the end of my presentation. So right away at the top, we get a timeline view of these archival collections. If I hover over, it'll tell me what these numbers actually indicate, and that's 129 references to documents. So this event timeline, I can highlight it here. I can do some nifty timeline controls. And we'll see that once I do that, it's going to filter my timeline events here. These are these descriptions from the chronology file that we were provided with. I can also navigate my timeline like this. Nice simple move forward 5 years, move backward 5 years. And if I get lost and I sort of want to start from step one again, I've got a nice little reset button here that it's going to take me back to my sort of default state. There's lots of examples on Tableau Public of different implementations of this timeline concept. I've mashed a couple together here to sort of achieve my desired functionality, but it really varies quite a bit depending on the subject. This could be a bar chart, this could be a spark line, and there's lots of fun ways to navigate a really broad length of time using a visualization like this. Right now, though, I've still got tens of thousands of document references. I want to be able to efficiently filter these to a more narrow topic before I actually read through any of these chronology events at the bottom. Let's be real, I work in analytics, not in the liberal arts, so I don't have the type of attention span required to read through all of those. So instead, I'm going to do a search by keyword here. There's a little bit of logic behind this one as well, which is kind of fun. I've got a couple of options here for a match type when I search by keyword. I'm actually going to switch it over to any here just to show you what that looks like first. And we'll say that because I'm an analytics guy, not a nursing guy or anything like that, I'm more interested in that diagram from the Crimean War. So I'm going to add one keyword here and just say Crimea. We'll see how it does. This one happens about 1/10 of the time, another bug to debug before this thing goes into production. But we see that we've got still a pretty broad selection of years, but even just visually, we can see right away, this is probably when the Crimean War was actually happening, right? Some scant references to it later on in her life. It was obviously a big important event, which she would write about over and over again, but this is the bulk of it here. Still, in my opinion, probably too much to go sort of sift through. 88 is a big number. I like small numbers. So I am going to add a second keyword in here. And this is another little bit of logic. And you'll see actually in this case, my query has turned up more results than what I had before. And right now when I'm using this match type of any, essentially that's going to translate in VizQL to a sort of or condition where this first string, Crimea, could be in that description that I'm looking for in timeline events, or it could be diagram. And if either is true, then it'll return a match. So by adding the diagram keyword there, I'm really not narrowing my scope, I'm broadening it. But if I go to match type here and I select all, I've narrowed it quite a bit. So there's actually only one timeline event, and you can see it's in 1858 here, which contains both of these keywords. They don't necessarily have to be side by side, but both of them are in here. So I can click on here, and then you all can join me in my sort of journey into academic research here. So once I press a timeline event, this window is going to populate. This weird artifact is going to go away, thankfully. And I can click on a folio number here, which will navigate me to my letter. So here we are. This is the text that we originally saw on the website. Before, of course, the text ran from one folio number into the other. But as you can see here, we just get the one, so it looks like my code worked. One annoying nuisance that I sort of alluded to before is that this letter sort of cuts off suddenly. So I've seen Mr. Rollison today, and then to see him again with plans on Thursday, please tell Papa. And then it sort of cuts off. Well, what's happened? It turns out our Nightingale chronology events file actually only specifically relates to one folio number, and that these letters spill over into multiple folio numbers. So luckily, well, really not luckily, unfortunately, through much trial and error, and after realizing this issue, we have added an index so that we can do this and essentially just flip through it. So this takes us to that referenced black edged mauve paper bundle 133, and then the letter continues. So that's just another parameter control there, or a pretty simple one to filter between the index number of a given file. And then once we're satisfied with our research, I've read up, I've satisfactorily convinced myself that Dr. Lynn McDonald's interpretation of this document was correct. I can go click the back to timeline view, and I can go click new search and start all over. So that is it. And that is how I became a very amateur, not quite expert in the Nightingale archives, and got to sort of parse through some text data in a new and original way and wrangle all that data into a functional Tableau dashboard. So I'll switch back to the PowerPoint here, and we'll see if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Sean, for your presentation. It's very interesting to look at the process of turning text, which is a rather unstructured form of data, into an interactive dashboard. So let's take a look at the chat box, see if we have any questions. There's not any at the moment, but we'll give a few minutes for the audience to type in their questions. Okay, well, if there are no questions for Sean, thank you so much, Sean, for your presentation. We'll move on to prizes. Okay, I'm just going to.
All right, I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Sean. Okay. Yes, so it's now your turn to win prizes by playing a game of Kahoot. So to join the game, you enter the address on the screen, kahoot.it, so KAHOOT.IT. And let me just share my other screen here with the game pin. Okay, so the game pin is 8383393. You can paste it in the chat box. So I'll just give everyone a few minutes to join. And in the meantime, if you haven't played Kahoot before, it is a series of multiple choice questions and you earn points by selecting the correct answer. The top 3 winners will win some prizes from Tableau. Oh, and it switched off to the screen. There you go. Okay. Oh, I'm not sure why it keeps on switching over to the screen. Okay, so I'll give a few more seconds for anyone who wants to win a prize to join. Okay, let's begin. Where is Tableau headquartered? There's Edmonton, Seattle, Vancouver, or what's the other one? Oh, Mountain View, California. Nice, it's Seattle. Let's see who's in the lead. IG is in the lead. True or false, there are 9 different Tableau products. It is true. Oh, Brandon takes the lead. What are the different role licenses Tableau offers? Oh, great job. Everyone got this question right. Which of the following are examples of real Tableau dashboards? This one's multi-select, so you can select more than one answer. So there's a brief history of dinosaurs, Disney movies income, successful women, and the cost of 1 gigabyte of mobile data. So it turns out all of them are real Tableau dashboards. So if you selected all 4, good job. It's also dashboards from Viz of the Day, which you can subscribe to. Now we have our last question. True or false? After this Kahoot, you'll have a chance to win a free Tableau e-learning code. Okay. I think everyone's answered. I think there were 10 people. Yes, that is right. So let's take a look at who our 3 winners are today. Coming in 3rd place, we have Brandon. In 2nd place, Albert. And in 1st, Carrie. So congratulations to all our 3 winners. We'll ask that you please provide your emails in the chat box so we can contact you to collect your prizes. Okay, so I will now go back to the PowerPoint. information. Awesome, yeah, so before you leave, there's still a Tableau e-learning code up for grabs if you fill out our feedback form. We'd love to hear from you, how you enjoyed the conference, and what you'd like to see in the next one. So I posted the link to the form up on the slide, and I also pasted it in the chat box. You can also scan the QR code with your phone, and that will take you directly to the form. So thank you to everyone for coming out to the TUG meeting today, HINS, Onware, and Tableau for hosting the event, and the speakers Lee and Shaw for your wonderful presentations. Please feel free to connect with us via email or LinkedIn. Our contact information, as well as the link to the Edmonton TUG Forum, is up on the screen. So thank you everyone for coming out. I hope you learned lots about Tableau and enjoy the rest of your day. And let me just paste the information in the chat box so you can access it a bit easier. Okay, and there you have it. Thank you everyone.